I saw the black SUV coming a mile away, a shiny, alien beetle crawling up the dirt road where the only thing that usually moves is dust and regret. 3 targets inside, bad spacing, tires crunching over gravel that was never meant for city treads, and right then, I knew the piece was over. They weren't just visitors, they were invaders, office cowboys in polyester blends pretending they owned the world, marching up to my gate to tell me that my grandfather's legacy, the Ironwood homestead, now belonged to Oakbridge Estates. They told me I owed them $100 grand, just like that, casually tossing a life-ruining number at me like they were ordering a sandwich. I chambered a round in my shotgun, looked them dead in the eye, and asked the only question that mattered in that moment. Did you folks bring enough zip-up bags for the trip home? That was the moment the Cold War turned hot, but to understand why I was ready to die on that hill, you have to understand the smell of the place. When I first stepped out of my truck that morning, 12 years after leaving, the wind hit me with a scent that punches you right in the gut: sun-baked cedar, old motor oil, and that specific, dry Arizona dust that coats your throat and feels like home. The Ironwood homestead was 140 acres of thorns, broken fences, and the only freedom I ever really understood. To anyone else, it was a wreck, a sagging porch held up by prayers and a barn that leaned to the left like a drunk on a Saturday night. But to me, it was what Grandpa Silas left behind. He called the high ground Truth Ridge, a name I never got as a kid because I was too busy chasing lizards. But standing there now, looking at a world managed by algorithms and people who sit in swivel chairs, it felt like the last honest square mile on Earth. I started clearing the junk that afternoon, wading through a sea of rusted saws and coffee cans filled with bent nails, the kind of things a man keeps because he remembers when metal cost money. That's when I found it, wedged behind a rotting beam in the barn, a leather notebook that was practically fossilized, brittle as a dead leaf. Inside the back cover, folded with that military precision Grandpa Silas applied to everything, was a hand-drawn map of the property, marked in red pencil with coordinates, strange arrows, and a single note in his blocky, angry handwriting. If they come for the land, check the North Creek pump. The truth is buried there. I stood there in the dusty light, feeling the air leave the room, because Silas wasn't a man who played games or spoke in riddles, so if he wrote it down, it was a warning from the grave. I barely had time to process the map when the invasion started the next morning. It wasn't an army, it was worse. It was a silver luxury SUV that looked like it had been dipped in liquid money. Out stepped the unholy trinity of bureaucracy. A woman with hair like a hardened helmet and a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. A heavy-set guy who walked with the swagger of a retired cop who missed the power, and a twitchy little guy hugging a clipboard like it was a holy scripture. I walked out to meet them, holding a crowbar loosely, not as a weapon, but as a statement of intent. The woman, who introduced herself as Linda Vance, president of Oakbridge Estates, smiled at me with all the warmth of a starving reptile. "Mr. Teller," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "we have records indicating this parcel has been under our jurisdiction since the 90s, and due to your grandfather's failure to comply with our aesthetic guidelines, the accumulated fines total $100,000. The heavy guy, Bronson, crossed his thick arms, expecting me to crumble, to cry, to beg for a payment plan, but they didn't know they were talking to a man who had nothing left to lose. I laughed, a dry, cracking sound, and told them they were hallucinating, but Linda just blinked, her smile vanishing like a light switch, and threatened to seize the property within 30 days. That was the trigger, the moment the switch flipped in my head, so I walked inside, grabbed my 12-gauge off the rack, and stepped back out, not aiming, just letting the weapon hang there as a part of the conversation. The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to choke on, as Linda turned pale and her little clipboard carrier, Kevin, looked like he was about to faint. They backed away, real slow, realizing that their paper authority didn't mean much against steel and resolve, and as they peeled out of my driveway, Linda hissed that I would regret this, that they knew how to handle people like me. I watched them go, dust swirling around my boots, and I pulled out my phone to record the retreat because I knew this wasn't the end, it was just the opening ceremony. Trouble never knocks once, it kicks the door down in waves. The next morning, I was trying to enjoy a cup of black coffee when the second wave hit, a coordinated blitz of city officials. First, it was code enforcement, two guys in reflective vests who looked like they'd never held a shovel in their lives, claiming they had reports of unsafe structures. Then came a white SUV with government plates, circling my fence line like a shark, followed by animal control, all of them moving with a strange, sluggish coordination that screamed setup. They handed me a packet of photos, and that's when my blood turned to ice water. There was a picture of my tack room, taken from the inside, a room I kept padlocked, which meant they had already been inside my house, violated my sanctuary, and were weaponizing my own property against me. They slapped a yellow violation sticker on my barn, giving me 2 weeks to fix imaginary problems or face fines that would bury me. And as they drove off, I realized this was a siege designed to suffocate me under paperwork until I just gave up and died. But they made a miscalculation, a fatal error in judgment, because you don't corner a man like Jax Teller. You just make him focused. I drove into town, to the county records office, a place that smelled of toner and despair, and asked the clerk for the cadastral history of the Ironwood homestead. The clerk, a tired woman who looked like she had seen every scam in the book, clicked away at her computer until her eyebrows shot up. "That's odd," she whispered, turning the screen so I could see. My 140 acres were outlined in gray, but over it, like a parasite, was a bold red line labeled Oakbridge Estates Transition Zone, filed just 3 weeks ago by a private firm called Summit & Stone, Linda's pet consulting agency. But the terrifying part, the part that made my hands shake, was the shape of the line. It didn't follow the road or the creek. It curved unnaturally, looping deep into my land to swallow exactly one thing. The North Creek pump, the exact spot Grandpa Silas had marked on his map. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, staring at the documents, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They didn't want the fines, they didn't care about the long grass or the leaning barn. They wanted that pump, and they had redrawn the county lines to steal it. Silas had hidden something down there, something so valuable or so dangerous that these people were willing to forge legal documents to get it. I threw the truck into gear, the engine roaring to life, and as I drove back toward the ranch, I wasn't just defending a piece of dirt anymore. I was protecting a secret that people were willing to destroy me for. The ride back to the Ironwood homestead was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. I knew Oakbridge Estates wasn't done, but I didn't expect the next attack to come with a smile and a handshake. I pulled into my driveway and saw a beat-up blue pickup truck parked by the east fence, and standing next to it was a guy who looked like he'd been cast in a movie as a friendly country neighbor number one. He waved, easy and casual, introducing himself as Marcus Thorne, claiming he lived just over the ridge, which was strike one because over the ridge was nothing but scrub brush and coyotes. Marcus was good. I'll give him that. He had the jeans, the boots, the aw shucks demeanor, but the boots were too clean, and his eyes were too sharp, scanning my property like he was cataloging assets. He started asking questions, slippery little probes about whether the county was giving me trouble, offering to help with fencing, and then he dropped the bomb. "If you ever need help with old well maps, I used to do some surveying in the Guard." That was the tell, the moment the mask slipped, because nobody mentions well maps in casual conversation unless they know exactly what they're looking for. I played dumb, gave him a polite nod, and watched him drive away, knowing full well I had just met a spy sent to get eyes on the target. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I set a trap. I took a decoy notebook, weathered it to look like Silas's journal, and left it on a shelf in the tack room, right where a snooping intruder would find it, while the real map sat locked in a steel box under my bed. I rigged motion sensors along the fence and sat in the dark with my shotgun, waiting for the rat to come back for the cheese. At 2:42 a.m., the alarm chirped, South Barn. I moved through the shadows, silent as a ghost, the moonlight turning the ranch into a graveyard of silver and black. I caught them red-handed. 2 figures in the barn, one prying at the lock, the other rummaging through bins. When I racked the slide of my shotgun, the sound cracked through the night like a whip. The big one, probably Bronson, bolted like a frightened cow, crashing through the brush, but the other one, the friendly neighbor, Marcus, hesitated just a second too long. I chased him down, tackling him in the dirt, the impact knocking the wind out of both of us. He swung wild, untrained punches, but I pinned him, pressing the cold steel of the barrel against his cheek. I ripped open his backpack and poured the contents onto the ground. Bolt cutters, a camera full of photos of my house, and a fake warrant stamped with the Oakbridge Estates logo. "You picked the wrong ranch, Marcus," I growled, dragging him up by his collar. I handed him over to the deputies when they finally arrived, but as I watched the cruiser lights fade, I knew this wasn't a victory, it was an escalation. Marcus was just a pawn, and capturing a pawn doesn't stop the queen. The retaliation was swift and brutal. The next morning, my card was declined at the gas station. I called the bank, only to be told by a robotic voice named Caroline that all my assets were frozen due to a pending civil litigation filed by Oakbridge Estates for the unpaid $100,000. They had weaponized the banking system, cutting off my blood supply, starving me out so I couldn't buy feed, fuel, or a lawyer. I stood there at the pump, the nozzle in my hand, feeling the crushing weight of a system designed to break little guys like me, and for a second, I felt real fear, not of the men, but of the helplessness. I called Elena Ross, an old friend who practiced law with the kind of vicious creativity that terrified normal attorneys. She listened to the situation, the freeze, the fake warrant, the spy, and then she said the words that changed everything. "If they want to drown you in paper, Jax, we're going to burn their house down with it." She laid out a plan so crazy it had to work. Oakbridge Estates had zombie lots, tiny, useless slivers of land left over from bad surveying that nobody owned. But technically, owning one made you a voting member of the HOA. "We buy one," Elena said, her voice sharp. "We use a shell company. It costs nothing, but it gives you the keys to the castle. You become a member, you demand the financials, and you expose them from the inside. Using the last of Grandpa Silas's emergency cash stash, literally bills hidden in coffee cans, we bought Parcel 22B, a pathetic patch of weeds and a rusted swing set behind a drainage ditch. It was the ugliest piece of land I had ever seen, but as I stood on it that afternoon, watching the sun dip low, it looked beautiful to me. It was my Trojan horse. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a member of Oakbridge Estates, and I was about to tear them apart from the inside out. Back at the ranch, the pressure was mounting. Strange trucks were parking by my gate again, watching, waiting. I went to the safe box and pulled out Silas's real notebook, looking at the map one more time under the lamplight. I noticed something I had missed before, a second, faint circle drawn around the North Creek pump, and a note scribbled in the margin, "Not for them. Metal at 40 feet. Anomaly." My heart stopped. It wasn't water. It was metal. Silas hadn't dug a well. He had built a vault. And Linda Vance knew it. She wasn't trying to expand the neighborhood. She was trying to excavate a treasure, and she was running out of time. That night, the sensors on the south pasture screamed. They weren't sneaking around the barn this time. They were at the pump. I grabbed the floodlight and the shotgun, my adrenaline spiking. I wasn't going to arrest them this time. I was going to end this. The night air was sharp, filled with the sound of crickets and the frantic scraping of shovels against earth. I moved through the tall grass, a shadow among shadows, until I saw the blue glow of a tarp-covered lantern near the North Creek pump. There were 3 of them, digging with a desperation that bordered on panic, and standing over them, directing the operation, was Bronson. They had a metal detector that was singing a high-pitched whine. "It's close," one of them hissed. "Hurry up before that cowboy wakes up." I stepped into the light, shotgun resting on my shoulder, and said, "Evening, boys. You digging for worms, or your dignity?" Panic exploded. One guy dropped his shovel and bolted into the dark. Bronson froze, his hand drifting toward his belt, but he saw the look in my eye, the look of a man who is done playing by civilized rules, and he raised his hands slowly. I held them there at gunpoint, forcing them to sit in the dirt while I called the sheriff. But this time, I didn't just report a trespass. I reported an illegal excavation on private property with intent to steal. As the deputies hauled them away, Bronson looked at me, sweating through his shirt, and mumbled, "Linda said it was millions. She said the old man buried a fortune." "Millions," I repeated, looking at the disturbed earth. "Is that what she told you?" The finale didn't happen in a shootout. It happened in a courtroom that smelled of floor wax and fear. Linda Vance sat at the plaintiff's table, looking impeccable in white, flanked by high-priced lawyers, while Elena Ross and I sat opposite with a stack of papers and a projector. They tried to steamroll us with the forged agreements. claiming Silas signed the land over in '98, but Elena was a surgeon. She systematically dismantled them. She proved the HOA didn't exist until '99. She showed the judge the forensic report on the forged signatures. And then, for the kill shot, she overlaid the HOA's annexation map with Silas's hand-drawn map, showing the red line curving perfectly to steal the pump. Then, we brought in Marcus Thorne. He had cut a deal. He sat on the stand, looking small, and admitted everything. The payments from Summit and Stone, the orders to find the map, the plan to steal whatever was in the well. The courtroom erupted. The judge, a man with a face like carved granite, vacated the liens, lifted the bank freeze, and referred the entire Oakbridge board for criminal prosecution. Linda started screaming, actually screaming, as the bailiffs cuffed her, yelling about how I didn't deserve it, whatever it was. But the real ending wasn't in the court. It was back at the Ironwood homestead. After I used my zombie lot to force a vote and dissolve the HOA. Watching the neighbors cheer as the tyranny of Oakbridge Estates crumbled, I went back to the North Creek pump. It was just me, the wind, and the ghost of Grandpa Silas. I hooked up a winch to the stone cap of the well, the same spot the thieves had been digging toward. It took an hour to pry the false casing loose. There was a hidden catch, a mechanic's trick Silas must have engineered decades ago. When the stone slid back, it didn't reveal gold bars or a box of cash. It revealed a heavy, sealed brass cylinder, stamped with the date 1952. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was the original, federally mandated survey marker, the master pin for the entire county sector. It was the absolute truth of the land. And wrapped around it was the original deed. Linda Vance didn't want gold. She knew her entire luxury development, Oakbridge Estates, was built on a surveying error. Their multi-million-dollar clubhouse, Linda's own mansion, the pool, it was all technically built on Banner land. This marker proved it. If this marker was found, her development was illegal. Silas had realized the error back in the '50s and, being a stubborn old mule, decided to bury the proof to keep the government off his back, calling it his insurance policy. He didn't leave me money. He left me the power to bulldoze a subdivision. I stood there holding that brass rod, realizing the magnitude of the secret. Linda was willing to destroy my life not for greed of wealth, but to erase a mistake that would ruin her empire. I carefully placed the marker back in the tube and lowered it into the vault. I wasn't going to bulldoze the neighborhood. Innocent families live there now. But I had the leverage to ensure nobody ever touched the Ironwood homestead again. A week later, we had a barbecue. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years showed up. Elena was there, smiling over a beer. I stood on the porch, looking out at the new gate I'd built, watching the sun set over Truth Ridge. We had won. The bad guys were in jail, the land was free, and the ghosts were quiet. But as I looked at that survey marker one last time before sealing the well for good, I had to ask myself, Silas hid the truth for 50 years to protect his peace. Linda tried to destroy a life to hide a lie. In the end, is justice about exposing every truth, or is it about knowing which truths are worth burying to keep the peace? I still don't know the answer, but I know one thing. On this land, we don't draw lines in the sand. We carve them in stone.